Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. Before we get started with the news for this week, I want to make an announcement. Jay, we have an intern.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a student of mine at the Northern Kentucky University, Christian Carey. And so welcome aboard, Christian. We're glad to have you as part of the team. And so Christian will be helping us.
Where's my coffee?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think we'll try to make it a little more engaging for him than that. But Christian's going to be helping us build up the Bipartisan Political Education Project, which is the nonprofit that we're transitioning into. And the goal will be to kind of give you more in-depth policy analysis from both the right and the left. And so I have Christian working on a project or two that I think will help make that happen. So again, welcome aboard. We're really glad to have our first official intern. There we go. All right. So we start today's show with the latest in the conflict between the FBI and a number of Republican lawmakers, as well as President Trump. This week, the House Intelligence Committee voted to release a 4-page memo detailing alleged FBI abuses related to the Russia investigation. The vote was along party lines, with all of the committee's Democrats voting to not release the memo, arguing that it posed a threat to national security of some sort. Now, committee Democrats were supported in this contention by the FBI, including Director Christopher Wray, who President Trump named to lead the agency back in the summer. At the time, he called Wray a man of impeccable credentials who would serve his country as a fierce guardian of the law and model of integrity. I wonder if he still thinks that. Anyway.
As you point out, Trump's been wrong before.
There you go. Well, now Democrats on the committee prepared their own rebuttal report, which the committee voted to not release, and this again was in a party line vote. Now, Democrats claim that this was done to silence any criticism, while Republicans say that the Democrats' report, which reportedly is over twice as long as majority report, would have revealed sensitive information. Now, as everyone knows, the memo was released on Friday. I read it, and honestly, I was pretty underwhelmed after all that buildup. To me, it suggests that wants us to be left with the impression that the FBI got their FISA warrant using, somewhat questionable evidence, to say the least. But the problem I have with this is that we don't know if that's the only evidence the FBI presented to court, because, of course, the underlying warrant application wasn't released, and these things tend to run 60 pages or more. And the FBI, of course, can't officially comment on this because any other material aside from what's in the memo was classified. And of course, the Democratic minority's rebuttal memo wasn't authorized for release. But on the other hand, it makes me question the FBI, the Justice Department, and others who claim that this would be somehow damaging to national security. I have no problem with the argument that it's cherry-picking facts and potentially misleading, and that's something that Representative Schiff, who's the ranking minority member on the committee, is arguing. And I should also mention that after the memo was released, Schiff posted a lengthy commentary on it, which he is on Twitter and various other places, and said he'd be calling for a vote to release the Democratic rebuttal on Monday, February 5th, and I certainly hope that comes out.
Just so I've got this straight. The Republican memo, which is 4 pages and which has been made public, and which went through a scrubbing process, we should add, before it was made public. The Democrats are overly concerned and were vehement that memo should not be released because it would endanger national security. Whereas now the Democratic memo, which is allegedly is what we understand to be twice as long, much more detailed, must be released, but will not endanger any sort of national security. Just laying that's where the playing field is right now.
Let me respond to that, because I think it's partially true. My understanding is that there are 2 arguments that are being made by the Democrats. One of them I think is very questionable, and the other one I think is less questionable. There's the argument that the release of this is somehow in and of itself damaging to national security in the sense that it reveals things that should not be revealed. And that, to me, based on my reading of the memo, seems highly unlikely.
The
Now,
only information we know is that the FBI went to the FISA court. They used the dossier, at least in part, to obtain a FISA
right,
warrant, and that they essentially spied on Carter Page.
right. But the second argument, and this is the one I think is certainly more reasonable, is that the release of this memo is misleading and one-sided and doesn't include important context. And I think that that certainly seems reasonable to me.
Well, no, fair enough, but there's it's sort of two different questions.
Sure, absolutely, no question.
And I think here's the thing. Look, and I like to do this every now and again, just because for those people who've actually played the game, this is how you play it. And the Democrats are always so much better at it than Republicans. Although the Republicans have been getting better, I have to say, in the last couple of months, particularly on this issue. But if I'm a Democratic lawmaker, what I put in the memo, I write my memo, which rebuts all these points. And I do add all the national security stuff that makes it impossible to release. And thereby the Republicans don't release it, and then you get to say whatever you get to say about, oh, look, they won't let it see the light of day. Now, I think the Republican response is, let's let it all out. And I think that's probably the best thing for democracy, for transparency. My sense is whatever sensitive information is in there should be able to be scrubbed or redacted, what have you. But we'll see.
Let me ask you a more fundamental question, I guess, because I really want to get your take on this. Now, to start with, I'll say the House Intelligence Committee has every right to investigate the FBI. You could even argue they have an obligation to do so when there's a question about the integrity of the agency. I have no problem with that. I don't think anyone should have any problem with holding executive branch agencies accountable, right? Now, there's already a Justice Department Inspector General's investigation going on, but you can make a case
that's a different investigation on some different stuff.
Exactly. And you can make an argument that having something that's being done by another branch is perhaps better and more legitimate. But here's my question. Here's what I'm trying to understand from anything other than a politics standpoint. Why release a memo before concluding an investigation? I'm trying to understand what end that serves other than a political end. And not only that, but it seems to me that Devin Nunes should have at least reviewed the underlying information before he released the memo, which apparently he didn't do. And so that's what I don't get. I understand this as a political maneuver, but I don't understand what interest is served, what public interest is served by releasing information about an ongoing investigation, certainly partial information about an ongoing investigation, how that does anything but potentially cast aspersions, doubt on the FBI's integrity before an investigation is concluded. I don't get that. So maybe you can give me your take on that, Jay.
Well, I think keep in mind a lot of the remedies that we have under our Constitution, under our trifurcated government system, are political. They're not legal. It's not a matter of you just go to court where you get this application or you get an order that says this or that. I think what Nunes did is he put out enough information to justify the continuance of this investigation. And really, if you just look at the facts that are not in dispute on this, I mean, I can't imagine. You've got to admit this is sort of troubling stuff.
Well, hold on one second, just before you get to that. When you say he put out enough information to justify the continuance of the investigation, I mean, it seems to me that it doesn't need to be justified at all. I mean, that's part of the House Intelligence Committee's purview. They have the right to investigate any of that. So again,
right, but they do it on the political playing field. And every night the Democrats will get on TV. Adam Schiff will come out and say, "There's nothing to see here, nothing to see here. Why are we wasting money on this? This is ridiculous." The mainstream media will tend to repeat that. Nothing to see here, nothing to see here. It's all just a distraction from the real collusion and so forth. So no, I think if he wants to keep investigating, he's got to push back. He has to,
or else he'll be
and
stopped.
he is,
I
yeah.
mean, who's gonna stop him? I mean, that see, I really know. We've
Well,
talked about
the
this.
people, no, like the people who will stop him, would be, let's put it this way: if the Democrats were to take control of the House next year, where do you think this investigation goes?
Oh, I think it goes exactly the same way that the House investigation of the Trump Russia thing goes. It becomes just a complete. I won't say a complete farce, but certainly it becomes, it very much changes in terms of
If
the
Adam Schiff
vigor.
becomes
Yeah,
committee or
exactly.
becomes
Sure.
chairman of the committee,
Right.
this goes away entirely. Uh, it's going to be a campaign issue. The Democrats will campaign on this. Uh, that this was all a just a distraction. So I think it's politically important to show. Look, this is something that's going on, and the idea is if Democrats just stonewall long enough, wait out the election, and win back the House, well, this all goes away. So I think this is the kind of thing where it's important to get an update. And this is again, we're talking about some facts that are not in dispute, about questions that have been asked for well over a year now.
But that are also taken, very much out of context.
Well, I mean that let's. I mean, I'm not sure how is it taken out of context if the I mean this is was I believe McCabe's testimony before the committee. It's verbatim testimony that he said there wouldn't have been a FISA warrant without the dossier.
Right, I'm
I
not
mean,
right. I'm
that's his
not
context. I mean,
right. I am not questioning. I'm not saying that the Republicans are manufacturing facts. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that to understand if or whether or not that this warrant was a legitimate thing or whether it was based on evidence that was far too flimsy, the only way to really determine that is to have the same information in front of us that the FISA court had, and we of course don't have that. And this is what really burns me up about this: not just this investigation, but the Mueller investigation as well. And I think that the leaks from that have been unconscionable. So I'm not arguing this as a partisan issue at this point. What I'm saying is that the 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 media whips everyone into a frenzy about these little tidbits of whether it's leaked information or declassified information clearly set out to serve a political end. You have innuendo, partial truth, cherry-picked facts, and my
but
view
which
from
but
wait,
which
let me just finish.
all
My
right.
view from the beginning has been, let's wait for these investigations to run their course. Let's take a look at the complete evidence that we have access to, and then let's reach some conclusion. I do not have a predetermined conclusion about this. I'm willing to go where the facts as they're presented to me lead me. And so if the full set of facts suggest to me that the FBI is biased and incompetent at the highest levels, well then that's a problem, certainly, and I would accept that. And I think that that's what all of us should be willing to do. And I agree with Senator McCain, who in his statement just yesterday said our nation's elected officials, including the president, must stop looking at this investigation through the warped lens of politics and manufacturing partisan sideshows. If we continue to undermine our own rule of law, we are doing Putin's job for him. Absolutely right, in my view.
Oh my gosh, the always helpful John McCain. Um, here's the thing though. If the let's wait it out till the investigation is complete. Uh, that's sort of like saying, um, to use a football metaphor, there's a minute and a half left on the clock, and the other team has the ball and they're up by 7. Would your plan be to to vigorously try to get that ball back, or there will try to wait and run out the clock? And that's the Democrat plan is to wait and run out the clock so that this investigation is never concluded, doesn't see the light of day, or is concluded under the auspices of Adam Schiff, who will say, "Oh, see, nothing to see there. It's all classified, never goes away." And I think this is really important for people to understand that what we have here is we have evidence, and again, it's not contradicted evidence. I mean, if someone wants to say, "Oh, it's cherry picked," or there's other facts, okay, then I would agree those facts should be out there. what it shows was you had a a a third party paid by the Democratic National Committee who received. Well, let me back up. You had a warrant issued, and again, this is from the uh, direct testimony of. And again, if it's McCabe, if it's Rosenstein instead of McCabe, I apologize to whomever. But from their testimony to the committee, to the both of them, both sides of the committee, if not for the dossier, the warrant would not have been issued. So that makes it, that sort of takes whatever the other evidence is out there, that makes it a little less relevant, if not entirely irrelevant.
I disagree because that's certainly one statement from one person, but that's not the person. But wait, hold on.
That's the person who went to get the warrant.
But that's not the person who made the decision on the warrant. So, do
Right.
we know if that's my point is, and so in one sense, you and I agree.
This way, the FBI would not have felt that it had enough evidence to go to the court without the warrant, or without the
maybe
dossier.
not.
That's
I need to see that to make that conclusion. But I understand your point. But I think that one area, at least in this, where we generally disagree, one area we do agree is that if facts are going to come out, then as many relevant facts as possible should be put out there, as long as they don't endanger national security anyway. Okay,
Absolutely.
Well, there you go. At least we
and the endangering national security should, I think, be that the test that is always is the Supreme Court promulgated in, I want to say, 73 with the Pentagon Papers, that unless this would pose a clear and present danger to the United States, it ought to come out.
And
my sense is that none of this the information relating to the investigation of the mysterious Carter Page would pose that sort of danger.
Well, and there you go. And I like I said, while I disagree with the idea of releasing tidbits of information as an investigation is ongoing, I do agree with you that if information is going to be released, it needs to be as full of a picture as possible. And we'll see. We'll certainly see what happens next week with the Democrats' rebuttal memo. And yeah,
I have to push just one little last question for you, though. I mean, aren't you troubled? I mean, hypothetically, if this is true, and again, the facts that we've seen are not contradicted, there may be perhaps additional facts or spin to go with them, but that a FISA warrant to spy on an American citizen was granted and used and renewed multiple times based on evidence that is at best sort of like third-hand hearsay from a foreign government.
Yeah, let me
paid for by political opponents.
Sure, let me say unequivocally, okay, Jay, if that is the fundamental basis of that FISA warrant, I think that is a serious problem. I think that casts a very negative light on both the FISA court and the FBI, and I would have some grave reservations. To me, again, if that's pretty much it, that's a huge problem, and that does call into question the integrity of some of these people. So absolutely, yes.
Okay. All right.
All right. Before we move on, we would like to thank our first sponsor today, and that is Policy Genius. February is the shortest month of the year. You were aware of that, Jay?
I am.
Yeah, it's a very short month, sometimes a little longer. But anyway, that can make it really hard to fit in all the things you need to do this month. But if one of those things you need to do is get life insurance, and hey, if you don't have life insurance, you definitely should take care of that. You are in luck, because instead of calling a whole bunch of insurance companies for a quote or looking all over the internet, you can compare quotes at PolicyGenius.com. Policy Genius is the easy way to compare and buy life insurance online. They let you compare quotes in minutes, and they save you money too. In fact, Policy Genius has helped over 4 million people shop for insurance and placed over $20 billion in coverage. And they don't just insure life, they insure everything in your life. You can compare health insurance, disability insurance, renter's insurance, even pet insurance. They got it all. So if you're struggling to fit in 31 days worth of stuff into 28 days, save time by comparing life insurance online with Policy Genius. There's no sales pressure and zero hassle. You can get quotes in 5 minutes. PolicyGenius.com, because if you need life insurance, it shouldn't take a lifetime to get it. Okay, moving on, Jay. So let's talk a little bit about the State of the Union. President Trump gave his first official State of the Union address last week, calling for the unity we need to deliver for the people we were elected to serve, as well as formally announcing his immigration plan and calling for $1.5 trillion of spending on infrastructure over the next decade. Now, we'll talk about the immigration and infrastructure proposals in a little bit, but for now, I was just wondering, what did you think about the State of the Union in general?
Well, true confession, I didn't watch the whole thing, and you understand why. And you
Well,
probably have the
I
same.
point out that that President Trump's speech was the longest since Bill Clinton in the 90s. So,
Which was record setting
yeah,
back then, and yeah, I
two
didn't
men
watch
who
all that one
love the
either.
sound of their own voice. That's
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
I am disappointed. The typical, the first line, as you say, the state of our union is strong. And I was really hoping he would say, the state of our union is absolutely terrific.
That would have been good.
It would have been much more fun. But no, I would say generally, as Trump speeches go, this was one of his better ones. He pretty much stuck to the script. I posted on the Facebook page. I mean, it's one of those you just never know. I mean, maybe he'd talk about immigration and infrastructure, or it could have been about Rosie O'Donnell.
Sure.
So I'd say he stuck to the script. He did a generally a pretty good job and said what he needed to say. So I liked it. You and I mean, I think we can maybe have a quick digression, just State of the Unions in general.
Oh God, I hate him.
Yeah, it's a little bit. I also had mentioned, which I thought was sort of a brilliant simile. It's like it's like the Pro Bowl of politics.
Yes, oh, that's great. Yes,
In that, and it's like, look, all the famous people are there, all the big shots are there, but it's sort of the game that doesn't really matter, and everyone knows it doesn't really matter, and it's a horrible game to watch. So but it's something that we do anyway.
Yeah.
So
I also wanted to mention that even more pointless maybe than the State of the Union is the opposition party's response. And this year, the Democrats choose Joe Kennedy. Now, I'll say that he is, in terms of ideology and voting record, he's kind of middle of the road for a Democrat, but a 37-year-old multimillionaire, heir to a liberal political dynasty that goes back like over 80 years, that's the person you pick. I don't really.
Oh,
not
gosh,
that it matters.
He had a wonderful line, and I don't have it in front of me. Something about this country shouldn't be, for those who were, the privileged and so forth. It's for, and again, it just.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
Does anyone even read this stuff before they say it?
But again, it will all be forgotten by everyone except for the true political sort of geek maniac type of folks. These things.
Not even that. I would say. I mean, let's because I was thinking about this also and maybe readers can write in of State of the Union speeches that were memorable or that really mattered. I can think of one, and that would be George W. Bush right after the 9/11 attacks. And again, maybe less for any particular policy thing, but just for showing national resolve and so forth, and an emotional moment. Beyond that,
didn't Clinton give one? Didn't Clinton give one that was split screen with the OJ thing, the white Bronco sort of thing? I seem to recall that.
Anyway, because the white Bronco thing was in the summer, though. And
okay, well, it was a big anyway. But the point is that the fact that you and I, who follow politics very closely and care about this, about policy and so forth, it is, and we can blame if you're a conservative, you'll love this. We can blame Woodrow Wilson, who all true conservatives just hate with the fiery passion of 1,000 suns, because he was the one who sort of revived the tradition of making this a speech as opposed to just a letter you'd send in every once in a while. And so there you go. Another thing that a conservative can blame Woodrow Wilson for.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm sorry. My only other outstanding State of the Union memory would be Obama admonishing the Supreme Court, which again, just because it's out of the ordinary and sort of shocking. And also, if it wasn't that same State of the Union speech, I think it might have been the one before, when whoever yelled, "You lie!"
Yeah.
So again, that's sort of the It's you remember not, so much the message or what happened, but sort of the bizarre highlights that attend it.
Exactly. Exactly. Before we get to the actual substance, and there were a few substantive policy proposals in the State of the Union, we'd like to thank our newest supporters this week, and we have a number of them. First off is let's see, we have Jake, Becca, and Brian, all new Patreon sustaining supporters. Now, Jake writes, "Hey gents, I never do this kind of thing, but wanted to take a minute to thank you for what you're doing. I am an Oregonian who has been living in Germany for about 16 years now. Like most masochistic people nowadays, I am completely addicted to the 24-hour news cycle. He says, Mike and Jay, you are a breath of fresh air in political discussion. As an American living abroad, I am constantly asked by people to explain American policy and culture. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. Specifically, immigration.
What are the
Yeah.
answer to that?
He says specifically, immigration and gun control are always topics where people can't understand the American perspective. Your program helps a lot for me to empathize with differing political opinions and be able to offer much more thoughtful responses than simply saying what I personally agree with. Mike, you even managed to calm my trembling rage of the tax bill by offering some of your insight into what was not so bad. Too often, right and left scream past one another and no one hears the other. Keep up the great work. The donation isn't much, but I suppose every bit counts. Absolutely, it does. And
Thank you so much, and
yeah,
thank you for the kind words too.
yeah. And then he
Because that actually makes a big difference too.
yes, without a doubt. And then he closes by saying, "Keep making me sound smart at the dinner table." Well, we will do our best, Jake. Thank you. Next is Brian, who lives in Red Line, Pennsylvania, and he writes, "I just wanted to thank you for what you do on your podcast. With the current climate being so ridiculously partisan, it's incredibly refreshing to hear an attempt at open-minded, nuanced discussion. My personal political history has been all over the map. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania being two big blue cities swimming in a sea of red, and had only ever met a handful of Democrats before college. But for the last decade and a half, I've shifted further and further left from my conservative roots, at least on a lot of issues." Good for you, Brian. I've been registered as a Republican and a Democrat and have at times voted Green and Libertarian. All this is to say that my views are complex, nuanced, not easily pigeonholed, and hopefully constantly evolving. One of the things I like most about your show is that it keeps me on my toes. All three of you often have somewhat surprising views on specific issues, and if nothing else, that causes me to look a little closer at my own positions, to question my assumptions, which I think is an incredibly healthy activity. And in the current partisan climate, it's amazing that you guys can hold such disparate beliefs and yet still hold a civil and productive conversation with each other where you sincerely try and understand each other's positions. We need more of this in general, and so I'm proud to support your podcast through Patreon. Keep up the good work. Keep challenging us by challenging yourselves. Thanks for all you do.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, that was really nice. And, one point that Brian makes that I think is really important. One of my sort of acid tests for whether or not a columnist is worth following, or anyone is kind of that I listen to for political information and insight on, is if I can predict exactly what they're going to say on every issue before they say it, then they're pretty much useless to me, And so I think that is important, because the people whose views surprise you occasionally, I think those are the people who are actually thinking about these things and not just sort of regurgitating whatever the party or ideological line is, And I think you probably would agree with that, right, Jay?
I do, yeah.
Okay, and then there's this from Mark. And Mark became a supporter not too long ago, but I missed his message at the time. Sorry about that, Mark. So he writes, "Just wanted to reply to your most recent episode, Politics Guys versus Diversity." He said, "Your listener mail was awful, and I wanted to compliment the work you do. I love that you are both centrist like me, sometimes a little to the left, sometimes a little to the right. I like it when you bring in the guests like Joe, who gives a totally different perspective, but I equally like to listen to the internal banter. I feel like I learned something every episode and just wanted to give you guys a compliment. Happy to give my little bit of financial support and happy to share your episodes with select people when relevant to conversations had. Keep up the great work."
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That means a lot too, that you share it with folks, and yeah.
Absolutely. I also wanted to point out this is our very last week with ads. After our Wednesday show, we are going ad-free for every episode because we know that's what you all want. And but that means, of course, your support is what will really keep us going. And so if you'd like to join, let me see if I get everyone's name here. Jake, Becca, Brian, Mark, and our other great Politics Guy supporters. you can go to politicsguides.com and click on either the Patreon or PayPal links. All right, moving on. So, one of the things that President Trump talked about in his State of the Union address was immigration, right? And his immigration plan, we'd seen parts of this before come out, but just to kind of recap, it has four basic components. The first is a path to citizenship for not only the 700,000 or so current Dreamers, but also people who qualify for the program but aren't currently part of it. And that's a total that comes out to around 1.8 million. The second part is tougher border security, including $25 billion for border wall expansion. Third is an end to the diversity visa lottery. And fourth is a major reworking of the family reunification visa program, which Republicans prefer to call the chain migration program.
That's what we call it.
Yeah, understandably, it's a lot easier to be against chain anything than against family reunification. So that just makes sense from a messaging standpoint, right? I mean, it's kind of the same logic that turned the estate tax into the death tax. It just, makes sense for the optics of it. But that's another story. Anyway, Jay, what do you think about this proposal?
And look, I generally, I think this is a good starting point, and I think it lays out the potential compromise. Let's set aside the chain migration and the lottery, because those are sort of separate issues. But the two bigger pieces, the Dreamers and border security, I mean, I think there's a deal in the making there, right? And I think it's an easy deal for Republicans, and it's a tougher pill to swallow for Democrats. So I think you did good laying that out there. Obviously, the devil's in the details, but Democrats who have been, let's put it this way, all in against any sort of wall, any sort of border security. I think they're going to be in a tough position if it's, look, where you're going to sort of betray the Dreamers and so forth, who we've got a deal on, and this wouldn't be the first time this has happened, because you want essentially less border security. That's a tough political position to hold. On the lottery migration, I'm sort of a mixed mind on that. I'm not sure where I come down, so I don't know if that qualifies me as to sort of the you didn't see where I was coming from that, because I'm not sure I know where I'm coming from, because I've read things on both sides. On the one hand, the idea that our immigration system is based in part on just sort of a randomness of we want so many from this country, so many people from this country, and let's literally have a lottery to see who comes over. That seems to me to be sort of a irrational way to run an immigration policy. That said, I also see the argument that there are a lot of folks who have come here through that type of lottery program and done incredible things. So, I guess I'm troubled by now, would those people have not come here but for that lottery program, and would there be a better way to get them in? And I don't know, because in a lot of cases, the folks who came here were not. Didn't have any particular skills or accomplishments, or were Norwegian or anything like that that might somehow distinguish them. But yet they prospered, and to the benefit of themselves, their families, and the rest of the country. So that's where I am on that. And I think that's a tougher question.
Yeah, I agree with you. The first thing you were talking about in terms of the politics of it, I think you're right. For one thing, I think the Republicans who put this plan together, whoever in President Trump's administration did this, I'm assuming he didn't, sit down with a bunch of number 2 pencils and a piece of paper. But I think it's really smart, because they've been able to pitch this as a huge compromise for Republicans. I mean, but it's not. It's a huge compromise for certain people like Tom Cotton and Stephen Miller and so forth. But for most Republicans, it's not, because the one thing there's huge bipartisan agreement on and huge public support for is allowing the Dreamers to stay in the country, right? And so the brilliant politics of this is saying, well, we'll give even more on that, right? Not just the current Dreamers, and we'll throw in a path to citizenship. That's not a huge concession, but what they're asking for in return is obviously huge for the Democrats. So I think you're absolutely right. It puts the Democrats in a difficult position. But then you throw in those other two things that aren't really related as much, as you pointed out, the family reunification program and the diversity lottery.
Chain migration.
Yeah. And I think that is going to make it a lot harder to come up with a deal. Certainly I can understand why Democrats just want a clean vote on the Dreamers. They're not going to get that, right? I think that's fairly safe to say. But I've thought about this as well, and I wrote a blog post on it just last week, or I think last week, about maybe it's time to bend a little bit on the wall. If it's that worth 1.8, giving 1.8 million Dreamers a path to citizenship? I have huge issues with the wall for a lot of reasons, but I think there's a negotiation there. Now, when you get into I also think, and this maybe is where I will sound like people wouldn't have necessarily expected this. I think there maybe is some wiggle room on the family reunification visa program. I think making it like right now, President Trump made it sound like basically if you have a fourth cousin or something like that, you can bring that person on his program. That's just not true. It's it's spouses and siblings essentially. But the thing is obviously you can kind of see how the chain, as you will, forms from that. But making it spouses and minor children, I think that kind of, I can sort of see that as
I think that's an easy sell.
So again, this isn't like this crazy radical type of thing, at least from my perspective. The only part of it that I have some issues with is the diversity visa lottery, because like you, I think, diversity can be a very good thing, and having that kind of element in there of bringing people in, not necessarily because it's economically useful. And, this gets into what's the purpose of immigration. Why do we let people in? If we just do it because we're looking to specifically improve our economic performance, well, we have one kind of a program. But that's not historically been what America's all about. I mean, historically, it's, well, there have been big times when we haven't had this, but, you can make a case for a much more open immigration. In fact, Trey did that on a Facebook post. Trey actually suggested, well, let's just open the doors to pretty much everyone except for people that, are carrying their, ISIS cards, essentially.
Yeah,
and,
that's a bad idea.
Sorry,
Trey.
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as Trey, but I think, I can understand what he's getting at kind of fundamentally there. And I think it would be interesting. One listener posted on Facebook said, we need to talk about immigration in a broader context, like the distinction between legal and illegal. If there are caps, what those caps should be at, what kind of selection criteria we should have. And that's a longer conversation. I think certainly we haven't heard the end of this. We might want to do an entire show on that. I think that would be really interesting.
Well, I guess, if you think about the diversity lottery, again, to me, that's the problem for me is if you're looking for people who really want to come here and for people who bring certain skills, I'm not sure what the national interest is in saying, okay, we have diversity and representation from this many particular countries. I understand there's sort of a good feeling, warm and fuzzy thing, but Trump made the statement and he was much maligned for it. But he said, "Do we really need more Haitians?" And setting aside Haitians, this isn't a rap on them or anyone else. But is that sort of how our national policy ought to be run? Of people sitting around in Washington saying, "Well, you know what? We need more of this and less of this, and more of these people and less of these people from these countries and those countries." And to me, it comes up, well, why? So, we have typically welcomed, particularly those who come here from, back in the day, the communist world, the second world, and there was part of our immigration program that's separate, that's allowed for refugees and people fleeing political oppression. And to me, that part is still important. That's separate and apart from the diversity lottery. But I guess I'm still, I think diversity is valuable to have. But I guess my question is, do we get there naturally by selecting, people and skill sets as opposed
Sure.
to
It's, I
X
think,
number of people from this country or
yeah,
that country?
I think it's absolutely an important question. So maybe we'll do an entire show on that, or a bigger segment. I think that might be worthwhile. But before we move on and talk about infrastructure, we want to thank our second sponsor for today, and that is SeatGeek. Buying tickets to sporting events or concerts can be a real hassle, but it doesn't have to be. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event, whether you're searching for, a last minute deal, planning a big night out, or looking for a really nice gift. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices. It's fully guaranteed. I've used the SeatGeek app myself a bunch of times, and it is by far the easiest way I found to shop for tickets. You can be anywhere, and just a few taps, boom, instantly find seats. In fact, just yesterday, I used SeatGeek to find great tickets for Jerry Seinfeld, who I've loved for, geez, I'm old, decades, I guess it's at this
Right.
point, it's God. Anyway, and best of all, Politics Guys listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. That's right, $20 off. All you have to do is download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code PoliticsGuy today. That's promo code PoliticsGuy for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Okay, so Jay, I wanted to talk a little bit about infrastructure. Now, President Trump didn't release a full infrastructure plan, but he talked about it. It's clearly going to be a focus of this time he has, with a unified Republican control of Congress until January of 2019, please. But anyway, the president called for legislation that would result in around $1.5 trillion in new infrastructure spending over the next decade, and details are supposed to come in the next couple of weeks. Now, what we know at this point is that most of that 1.5 trillion wouldn't come from the federal government under the president's plan. That calls for, we're told, around $200 billion in federal money, which will be used to encourage states and the private sector to come up with the rest. So in other words, the federal government's going to, under this plan, put up around, 13%. And somehow, I don't know how, states in the private sector are going to come up with 87%. Good luck with that. So we'll talk more about this in detail as we get details, but I was wondering what your take is on this as sort of a general outline, at least.
The general outline, and I think this is where Trump actually sort of adds value, because this is sort of his wheelhouse, right? I mean, building stuff. And I see this very much as this is a Donald Trump, the developer, making the first opening bid in the negotiation, saying, all right, federal government, we'll give you 13%, and you guys got to kick in the rest, and he will await the counteroffer. So I think it's good. I don't think it's a bad idea that the federal government spend less and more of that flow to those expenses flow to the private sector or to states or local governments, who, and again, if you follow the money, sort of they get their money then from the federal government in a lot of, through different various programs. But look, I think infrastructure is one of those bipartisan winner sort of issues. Republicans, while they are hesitant on spending, and while all these projects always cost more than they ought to and take longer than they should and all that, it is something that we need, and it's something that Republicans generally regard as this is a right and proper function of the government.
Yeah, the problem, of course, is, as you point out, is paying for it. Either we get the money from the Chinese and the Japanese at around 2% interest, or we pay for it ourselves, I guess, or some combination of that, and I think the problem has been that we have been unwilling to do anything except ask the Chinese and the Japanese, who, a lot of people think that the Chinese own like all of our debt, but the Japanese own just about as much. I mean, they're a close number too. But the point is that's how we've been funding so much, and I think that's a problem, especially when you take a look at the federal gas tax. Now, President Trump earlier suggests that he might be open to considering this. I mean, right now it's 18.4 cents a gallon. It's been that way for the last 24 years. And I think number one, that should be indexed to inflation for a start. And also, this isn't like some crazy left-wing thing. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has proposed a major increase in the federal gas tax to 25 cents per gallon because they understand that that better infrastructure is huge for promoting growth. And so I think that that same sort of logic that Republicans use to talk about how tax cuts promote growth, you can use that similar sort of logic that this is an investment that will actually lead to greater growth, And so the question is, where do we get the money for this investment? Well, I actually would rather we not have to pay the Chinese and the Japanese 2% interest on, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're talking about $1 trillion, all of a sudden that does actually add up. I would rather we paid for it ourselves by having some reasonable increases in taxes and setting up a system so that we not only get our infrastructure up to a reasonable point, but that we put it on a sustainable footing. This shouldn't be a periodic crisis that we have to deal with.
Well, I think there's some things that, and if you understand the way these things are funded too, that one, this is a reason Republicans and Democrats both like it, is because infrastructure investments are amortized, meaning they are paid off over years and years and years. It's not one big hit. And the way that when we say that the Chinese own this debt or the Japanese own this debt, the way that comes about is that the United States or whatever local government is building this, issues bonds, and then those bonds are purchased by whomever. It's not necessarily it's a different scenario. It's not like we go to China and say, hey, can we borrow this much money?
Sure.
It's not like you sit down with the banker or something like that. And so and in many ways they buy these bonds because they're good investments. They're stable investments. Now maybe there could be ulterior motives too. That they want to have more leverage, but I think that's important. And when you talk about gas tax receipts funding it, part of the problem is those gas tax receipts don't come in all at once, and they are a little less reliable than knowing you have the one big chunk of money that comes from a bond offering.
Good point. I wanted to ask you about something about gas taxes. It seems to me that there's an important difference between general purpose taxes, I guess I'd call them, like income taxes, whether they're individual or corporate, and specific purpose taxes like the gas tax, which goes, to the highway trust fund. And I actually have some sympathy for the kind of conservative argument that tax dollars are wasted by the government. But it seems to me you can make a better case for a very purpose-specific tax. I don't think they should really be seen in the same light.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. No, and I've, in my past life, I've been one of these people who've made that argument and worked for people who've made that argument. That the idea is, look, if you have one tax or one revenue source, let's call it, and it is dedicated to this certain thing, and it goes into this lockbox, and it all gets paid for education, or it all gets paid for highways, or something like that. That's good because it takes some of the politics out of how this is all divvied up.
Yeah, and that,
so I think there's a good argument there. Now, the counter argument is that there have to be sort of safeguards in there to assure, because money is fungible. That it's not a matter of for example, if you look at the Social Security Trust Fund, the way we fund that is we don't really fund it. It's all sort of,
there's a bunch of IOUs, in the lockbox, essentially. Yeah. But
and that money is then just redirected for use other places. So it depends on how you set up the program. I think the highway tax, the highway funds, is a more secure. And if someone's got more details than I do, which someone probably does, they should, feel free to chime in on that. But my sense has always been there is more of a direct payment for the gas, and again, probably because you can tie it to the bond payments and so forth.
And that, to me, kind of the broader issue is, I think it's reasonable, and even I agree to a certain extent. I'm not to a certain extent. I agree entirely with being anti-government waste, anti casually throwing away tax dollars. Who wouldn't be against that? But the idea of just being anti-tax full stop, it matters so much what the taxes are and how they're being used. So, and I'm glad that you and I are in agreement on that. So,
Well, and to me, again, the at the end of the day, it's sort of if you spend the money on a highway, even if you probably pay too much for it and takes too long, you still have a highway. Whereas opposed to a lot of these other priorities, if we're going to spend X amount in let's say foreign aid, because that's an easy one to beat up on, even though I know it's not that much.
tiny
You know,
amount.
what do you get at the end of the day? If it's the CDC is going to conduct more research on gun violence or something like that, what do we have at the end of the day?
Now, this isn't you calling for us to cut foreign aid to our biggest recipient, Israel, though.
No, not at all. I'm using
Right.
this as,
No,
as an
yeah, I
example of
understand what
someone
you're
who
saying,
could say, where is the tangible payoff of that government expenditure versus the tangible payoff of, oh, there's the bridge.
Absolutely.
They fixed the
Absolutely.
bridge. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, and I'm sure we'll have more on this when we get details on the plan. I'm a huge infrastructure sort of wonk sort of person, so I'm really looking forward to that. Anyway, so it is time for what we're reading, where we step back, and talk a little bit about the more in-depth, sort of thoughtful things we're reading, listening to, watching, what have you. And so this week, I want to recommend something about, well, the State of the Union. There's an article called "TV Gave Us the Modern State of the Union, Then It Killed It," and it kind of goes into some of the history of the State of the Union, kind of a staple thing for this time of year. I thought it was kind of an interesting read. Also, I should mention this week my blog post is college worth it? The case against education. Yeah, I know you wouldn't think I would say that, but basically there's a book coming out by a guy named Brian Kaplan, an economist. I had him on the show. I interviewed him on the show in November of 2016, and he wrote this book called The Case Against Education: Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. And that got me thinking about education. So I wrote this thing, and then I got in contact with Brian, and he said he'd be happy to come on the show. And I said, well, okay, I should probably read your book first. So I'm going to do that. And well, a lot of times interviewers don't even bother to read the book. So I really actually try to do that. I like to think it matters. But anyway, we're setting up the details, so hopefully he'll be on the show sometime in early to mid-March. But until then, hope you take a look at the blog post. So Jay, what do you have?
Well, what I've got, and this is, again, there are a lot of interesting things I read over the past week or so, but this always comes down to, I get my Saturday Wall Street Journal, and I sort of look through it right before the show, and then I'm like, wow, that's really good. And so I'm sort of, that's why I tend to pick this. But anyway, in the Wall Street Journal weekend interview, it is Jason Willick's interview with historian Gordon Wood. And the title is "Polarization is an Old American Story." Although the headline, as you read this, a lot of it is actually Gordon Wood talking about the state of our history and the historical study, for good and for bad. But anyway, it's one of these kind of things that I like, and I think it's particularly good for the "What Are You Reading," where it gives a bigger perspective. And he talks about. Again, the polarization of our country now is really not nearly as bad as it has been in the past. With particularly, he's looking at the election of 1800. So again, I think it's a lot of fun, and it's one of these. He talks about how the study of history is, there's sort of fads, and there's mention of an exchange from the movie Good Will Hunting. Where Gordon Wood is sort of mentioned, and alongside with Howard Zinn, and Wood sort of laments the rise of sort of the Howard Zinn school to the exclusion of I guess the Gordon Wood school. But anyway, it's I think it was really fascinating and fun, and again puts our national moment a little bit into perspective.
Perspective. I'm all for perspective.
Perspective.
And so, yeah.
There was the one. Hold on. Let me find the. He has one great line here that for one thing he mentioned. This is the interview saying that a lack of historical perspective can lead to apocalyptic thinking about the present.
Apocalyptic thinking about the president. Boy,
and that's
something
again that is big for me. That so often we move quickly to apocalyptic thinking.
That's fun.
Well,
Gotta
yeah.
love some
I'm
apocalyptic
not saying
thinking. It
I
sells
predict
papers
from
well.
Nancy Pelosi's "This is the worst bill in the history of America," and this. I think she
Or
actually used the word apocalypse.
yeah, or the
Uh,
Steve King, the Republican memo is bigger than Watergate, that kind of
yeah.
thing. Yeah,
Well, I
exactly.
would agree that that could be, but that's not necessarily apocalyptic. That's saying big. But my point is, yes, there are lots of things have happened in American history. Lots of things are bigger than what's happening now. So take a deep breath.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. All right. Well, I think, we're kind of running a little long, but I have one final sort of totally non-political thing to throw out there for listeners. I'm looking for some assistance, actually, not another intern or anything like that, but I am actually considering roasting my own coffee. And I understand it's simple and easy to do with a popcorn popper. And so I'm wondering, folks, if any of you have had any experience with doing this, if you have horror stories, tips, whatever, let me know, because I'm curious about this, but I don't want to destroy, burn down the house or anything like that. So let me know what your experiences are. If you have any thoughts about that.
I'm assuming it'll be some sort of fair traded coffee, of course, that
Yeah,
you roast.
absolutely. Yeah, I
Okay.
wouldn't do
Yeah.
anything
All right.
else without a doubt. But anyway, so yeah, let me know. It's Mike@politicsguys.com, and I want to hear all about your experiences. Okay, that does it for this episode. Thanks everyone for listening. We hope you like what you heard and that you'll check out today's sponsors. First is PolicyGenius.com, the easy way to compare and buy life insurance online, and SeatGeek. Politics Guys listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code PoliticsGuy. Listener support is going to be more important to us now than ever. And so if you'd like to help out, go to politicsguys.com, click on the Patreon or PayPal links, and there you go. And if you want to support the show without spending anything, or if you're already a supporter, you can share this episode with your friends, followers, or you guys should share it with your enemies, whatever. Pass along our new show posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter. That does help, as does leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes. If you want to get in touch with us, mail@politicsguys.com. And there's our Facebook page where you can message us and where we post all kinds of stuff throughout the week. There's obviously a big, long, fascinating back and forth on this news memo thing, for instance. That's facebook.com/politicsguys page. And we're also on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show was produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.